Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You are listening to this on United Public Radio, and the intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. And today I have one of my perennial guests, a crowd favorite, Dr. John Brandenburg. He's a plasma physicist. He did his graduate work in California at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in controlled plasmas for fusion power, and has worked in defense, energy, and space research. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles. However, the focus of Dr. Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity, and electromagnetism. So, without further ado, Dr. Brandenburg, welcome.
Hey, Sean. Great to be on. Always a pleasure and honor to be on your show. I think you ought to be standing. I think you ought to be standing a little closer to your razor, son. Your beard's coming in real nice. I'm just jealous because I can't grow. It takes me months to grow a good beard.
Yeah, but it does have a kind of a Grizzly Adams nature to it now. I need to.
It does. Well, it makes you look very wise. Wise and unlike me, like just some guy off the street.
Yeah, you're wiser than I am. So let's see. Look, some other folks. I guess you're Big B. I guess. All right. So
Big B.
Pleiadians.
The Pleiadians. I know. This is. I want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer that all of this we're doing right now is, in military intelligence, they call it forming an estimate of the situation. We have to take reports. We have to take whatever scientific data is available. We have to take, the public record, folklore, whatever. We try and put everything together to come up with an estimate of the situation. In a situation of mortal conflict, which I believe this is, all the real facts are classified, and of course there's also disinformation. Winston Churchill said, in wartime, the truths are so precious they must go everywhere with a bodyguard of lies. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today is stuff that I have gone through and evaluated. I'm a physicist. And I've tried to separate the wheat from the chaff. As best I'm trying to give you the best estimate of the situation I can give you, based on the fact that I was not part of the UFO cover-up when I worked in Washington D.C. I was not read into any programs like that. All I basically heard was a lot of interesting discussions around the water cooler and the coffee machine. And but I was in a SCIF. It's a secure facility, working with people who all had high security clearances. I had a high security clearances, and they would tell me all this stuff. They seemed to confide in me because I worked on the planet Mars, and I was well known to be an expert, not only on Mars science, but the fact that there was a dead civilization on Mars, and ultimately we discovered it was wiped out by a nuclear holocaust, thermonuclear holocaust, which does not look like it was natural. It looks like somebody from space annihilated these people, and but the artifacts that are left on the surface suggest a very humanoid civilization. These people look like us. They didn't look like lizards. They didn't look like the Greys. They looked like us. And they carved stuff that, you know, they created things that look like we would create. Even though the last time there were conditions on Mars that would have allowed such a kind of primitive indigenous civilization were long before the dinosaurs were wiped out on Earth. So we get, in one sense, we get this, the fact that, okay, very, very humanoid beings on an Earth-like planet, if we have two of them in the same solar system, and our civilization and that civilization on Mars are so far apart in time that there's no direct connection. I'm convinced there's no direct connection, that we had refugees from Mars come here, stuff like that. In fact, it looks like a primitive civilization. So we know there's primitive human, what looks like human beings predate terrestrial human beings. We also know that really bad things happen in this cosmos, just like they've happened on Earth. I mean, we had World War II, 50 million people got killed. A lot of them really, a lot of them died in death camps, or, you know, as programmed genocide. The whole world was at war. And, you know, we got into that war because of Pearl Harbor. And we suffered the Battle of the Bulge, and the Russians suffered the great invasion by Hitler. They say Joseph Stalin never trusted any person on earth except for Adolf Hitler. I should laugh about that. 30 million Russians got killed as a result of that situation. And so I'm just trying to, first of all, I'm giving you information I heard, which was from people I regarded as solid professionals. And, you know, I've heard a lot of other nonsense that I just reject. I'm not going to talk about that. But also I'm aware, I've educated myself on the folklore, and, you know, the public record. And part of the folklore is Hollywood, which apparently is plugged into the, ever since World War II, Hollywood has been an agent of the government, telling the public what the government, we're talking the deep state, wants, what Washington D.C. wants the public to think about things. And so anyway, I just want to start with that disclaimer that my knowledge is second and third hand. I was never read. If I was read into those programs, I wouldn't be able to talk about it, because I take my security oaths very seriously. But because of my work on Mars, I know there was what looks like a very primitive, there was a kind of Stone Age, Bronze Age civilization on Mars that was very human, was wiped out by a thermonuclear holocaust from space. So that predates us, but it also says that terrible things happen in the universe. And intelligent life may be the biggest enemy of other intelligent life in the universe, just like it is on Earth. When the human race first started out, according to the best they can make out from paleontology, the saber-toothed tiger and the great cave bear were the human race's worst enemies. Also the leopard in Africa. they find a whole bunch of human skulls at the base of these trees, which is that's how leopards kill something, and they drag it up into a tree and eat it. And they usually throw away the head because it's got the skull and there's not much meat on it. And they find all these human skulls at the base of these trees. So, and then there was the giant cave bear, which liked caves, and so did humans. They like caves for the same reason. And the giant cave bear stood about 8 feet tall when it was on its hind legs. It was kind of a big version of the grizzly. And one of the things they find is in the burial chamber, they found burial sites for apparently important people, great chiefs from like the Ice Age, when the human race was seeking a lot of shelter in caves because they couldn't be blown over during the storms. And they find stacks of cave bear skulls. I mean, these people mastered the art of killing cave bears. They became there were guys who were aces at it. And they would keep the skulls as trophies, just like, they didn't have good taxidermy, but at least they could keep the skull. And so when a Cro-Magnon man, a party of Cro-Magnon men ran into a cave bear out in the woods or at the mouth of the cave or something like that, both the cave bear and the Cro-Magnon man apparently thought the same thing. One of us is going to eat well tonight. So the human race is very rugged. The human race is very well designed to live on a planet like this. And we know there are planets like this out elsewhere in the universe. I mean, the people have been talking about Proxima Centauri. It's the closest star in the whole galaxy. It's only 4.2 light years away. It has a planet orbiting it in the liquid water zone from its little star that is almost exactly the same size of Earth and the same gravity. I mean, there's a big hint, right? Because, Proxima Centauri is so close to us, we can monitor its movements very carefully. And they figured out, here's this planet, 1.27 Earth masses, they estimate. And that means if it's made of rock, it's going to be made of rock like Earth. And yeah, it's orbiting the planet like it's orbiting the star every 11 days. It's going to be a pretty unusual place for human being, based on Earth reference. Imagine living in a place where everyone lives in the twilight zone, literally, because part of the planet faces the sun, and it's always daylight, and part of it faces the night sky where it's always dark. And so probably a lot of places, a lot of people live in the twilight zone, literally, the ring around the planet where the sunlight is, you can basically have half whatever degree of sunlight you like. And so now the human race is on Earth. I'm completely happy with the fact that we seem to be have been born here. I mean, we're indigenous to this place. There's a fossil record. There's two peculiar things, by the way, in paleontology or paleobiology that are great mysteries. One is the beginning of life itself on Earth. And the second one is the beginning of the human race. Both of those are mysterious because modern human beings appear very suddenly. in the fossil record. So now it appears other planets are very similar to Earth and similarly situated to have liquid water on their surface. Oceans are fairly common in the universe. And so it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that people like us would be living on those planets. But the amazing thing is that according to the reports, which are, and which are supported by all this folklore, including the Bible, we have people who are genetically compatible with us. Just like remember the not the Romulans, well, there was the Romulans, the Vulcans. Spock was the product of a mixed marriage. His father was Vulcan. His mother was human. He was perfectly healthy. And they report that intermarriage between these people from the Pleiades star constellation can produce healthy children in mixed marriages. And so that does, how could the genetics from two different planetary systems mesh like that? It just, but that's the reports. And in the Bible, and I love this part, it's chapter 6 of Genesis. It says, the sons of God, it's some Hebrew word, Nephilim or something like that, saw that the daughters of earth were very cute. And they took of them wives. I'm sure they were all married at the local justice of peace, of whomever they chose. Sounds like these guys could get what they wanted on earth. And the children of these marriages were great heroes, great men, about whom many legends are written. Some people say, oh, great men means they were giants. No, you can't. Anyway, you have to have people about the same size as humans to have children. Otherwise the mothers can't bear the kids. They're too big. A lot of women used to die in childbirth because they married a guy who was too big, and the child couldn't make it out of the birth canal, and so they would both die. They would all die. And so you have to have people who are physically very similar to us, not only genetically, but in terms of size, to have children. But the Greek legends and all these other legends are full of gods coming down from earth, siring children by earth girls, and those guys becoming great leaders, great heroes in the Greek legends, Perseus and Theseus, Hercules, all these guys were offspring of the gods about whom many legends were written. But the thing is, that's referred to in the Bible. And somebody said, well, these people were fallen angels. And I said, and I'm a Christian, I'm religious. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm just an Episcopalian. But I said, well, if they were fallen angels, their behavior was hardly angelic, I said. So, it looks like there were flesh and blood aliens who were genetically compatible with us in times past. And so part of our genetic makeup is then extraterrestrial. And so I just stop me when you've heard enough. So that's in the Bible and in the folklore. And then there are these people who claim to have they weren't abducted, they were invited on board spacecraft, and reported that there were people on the spacecraft who looked just like us. One of the most interesting reports, in fact, was that they were all wearing spacesuits and they had metal ring, kind of collars where you mount. And what that means is they are in a combat zone. So it's a rather complex situation we're hearing about. Apparently, and if you also look in folklore, the constellation of the Pleiades is just, everybody has legends about it, and it's all what's called androphification. It's always the seven sisters, the seven brothers, and they were on Earth, and the gods liked them so much they made them into stars. That's the Greek legend, seven sisters. The Pleiades are mentioned 3 times in the Bible in a very positive way. In the book of Job, they're mentioned twice. They mention the sweet attractions of the Pleiades. In Job, they mention Orion, which is a big, bright constellation. Everybody sees that during the winter. And but the Pleiades is just a little group of stars out there. There's a group of stars called the Hyades that makes up the head of Taurus. There's not that really much talk about that, even though it's a bigger cluster of stars. It's similar to the Pleiades, but nobody talks about it that much. They just say, oh, it's part of the bull. And they talk about the Pleiades, which are up above the main part of the Taurus constellation. And like Subaru, the car company, Subaru is the Japanese word for the Pleiades. And it also has the
why there's the stars on the back of every Subaru.
That's the stars. Those are the Pleiades. So, and then the book of Amos also mentions the Pleiades, saying, God is telling Amos, I made the Pleiades. So this is all very interesting, and and people have been invited on board spaceships, they claim, by people who look just like us, and some of them say they're all blonde haired with blue eyes, and others say, oh no, some of them have brunette, brown hair, and but it's so these reports have been made, and so you kind of think, how can this make any sense? But well, if you look at antiquity, which is the Bible is a record of antiquity, and all these other legends, it's as if there's somebody out there who's like us, so like us that they can have children with us. And so when I was in Washington, D.C., I was approached by one character who, whom was a solid professional. And this was in a classified setting. And I'm sitting in my office at this secure facility. All the work is classified. We all have high security clearances. And he walks into my office. I'm doing a report on some Russian or Chinese missile tests or something like this. And he says, John, he says, I heard something very strange from some people I've been talking to. They say that there are people down here on Earth who look and act just like regular human beings, and we can't tell them from human beings. And the people I've talked to are concerned because they're worried these people may be infiltrating the government, and everyone knew that I was a Mars guy that had been doing all this work on a dead civilization on Mars, and they liked me as a scientist, so they were confiding in me. And I said, and this guy says, "Do you have any ideas on how to tell somebody who's not from Earth from if they look just like us?" And by implication, since they were doing all sorts of genetic testing by that time, and every time you gave blood, you'd be able to tell if the blood was different than Earth. I mean, if it wasn't the same blood types. And he just said that this was considered a problem. So I had been by that time become aware there was a UFO cover-up. When I first arrived from Washington D.C., I didn't believe there was a UFO cover-up. I was told when I was working at Livermore Lab, there is no UFO cover-up, John. And by the way, the Earth is flat, and stay away from the edges if you want to finish your PhD and get out of here. And I said, "Yes, sir. Please sign my doctoral thesis so I can get out of here and get a real job and buy my wife a house so she won't leave me." It was sort of when you're a graduate student working, especially like at a big place like government laboratory, if they tell you you're supposed to believe a certain thing, that's what you do, because you want to get along with your thesis advisor. You're very dependent on the goodwill of the authorities. And they made it very clear that we weren't, if anybody asked us if there were UFOs, we were to say, no, sir, there are no UFOs. There are no UFOs around here. It's all a bunch of, the Air Force already wrote this Condon report, and said that it was nothing. Move along, folks. There's nothing here to see. So I started doubting that because we found what looked like a humanoid civilization on Mars, meaning, okay, we're not alone in the universe. And we also became aware that we were being surveilled by the government. And but what was interesting is the government, even though they had us under surveillance, like our phones started acting funny whenever we call each other. The phone would be fine when I call anybody else, but I call this one guy in California who's on the Mars thing, and the phone sounds like it's an echo chamber. And what I also described was it sounded like somebody was tapping a spoon. I thought, well, this phone is tapped. Somebody is actually making a tapping noise. And so I started to think, well, this very odd reaction of the government to put us under surveillance, but not, and I had a security clearance, but they didn't come and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Dr. Brandenburg, we don't want you working on this." And, as I was very, I'd been read into the, at a Q clearance, and I was very, very used to the idea that, if the government didn't like what you were doing, they would tell you, "Don't do this. Don't be interested in this. Don't ask questions about this program. You haven't been read into it," etc. So, well, anyway, so this guy asked me if I have any ideas. And I said, well, I just seen the movie Terminator, and they use sniffer dogs to tell the robots from, the Terminator type robots, android robots from human beings. So I said, why don't you use canine units? And they, and he really liked that idea. He says, good, that's a good idea. And I also said earlobes shapes, that's supposed to be one thing that people report. And anyway, so he left, and a week later he comes back and he says, we really, the people I talked to really like the idea of your canine units, and they're going to They're going to try it. This was back in like 1992. This conversation occurred. So obviously that was, you know, almost 30 years, more than 30 years ago. So a whole generation ago that happened. So it's fascinating and baffling at the same time. Now, the human form is a very practical form. I mean, look how we've dominated the earth. We're we are really top of the food chain here. And we can deal with just about any situation. I mean, look at how the locales that humans live in and have lived in for a long time, everywhere from the poles to the Sahara. And so this human form is Darwinian, in Darwinian sense, is a very successful form. And any planet with like Earth-like environments, and we're talking from the poles to the Sahara, any planet that would have environments like that, we would be able to thrive in. So, so I'm inclined at this point to think that, you know, just like, I mean, there are so many reports of these little short gray aliens that I'm absolutely convinced that that's an ongoing phenomenon. They're here. But I'm also now convinced that these Pleiadians are here, or people we would call Pleiadians, and they supposedly come in different varieties. There's what's called tall whites. You know, nobody can actually tell me what a tall white is. You know, some of them say, well, it's imagine a gray that's stretched. And I said, well, they said the tall whites got upset being confined at Site 51, so they wanted to go to Vegas. These two females who were tall whites, and you know, well, that was one version I heard. What I heard was it was a pair of Pleiadian women who were at Site 51, apparently part of some technology transfer program. They were down here on Earth. This is recently. And they wanted to go to Vegas. So they pestered their hosts to finally, they got them some outfits and they let them go to Vegas for a day and, you know, take in a few shows and play the slots or the crab tables or something like this. And then they brought them back to Site 51. So the women were happy. And this rumor is just crazy enough to be true. And having been married twice and to two very charming, intelligent women, it makes perfect sense that it would be two women, two basically human women who would get restless. I mean, the guys are all business, but the women decide that no, they can see this dome of light in the distance at night from Site 51. It's Vegas, and they wanted to go there, so they finally to make them and you know. So anyway, so that story is just crazy enough to be true. If we're dealing with people who are very similar to us physically, so they could go to Vegas with nice outfits and no one would notice them as being different from human women. And it also makes sense that if they had the same psychology as human beings, male and female. So anyway, yeah, Sean, ask me whatever questions you want. I basically, I'll say one last thing. You would imagine that people flying starships who look just like us, They supposedly have big starships. They're very powerful militarily. They are part of the. They are. You could say, well, they're the Galactic Federation that has prevented us from being invaded. They're backing us up. They're our friends, and you know they look on us as kindred, so they're looking after us as their weak cousins. And you'd say, well, their own past, you could imagine as, you know, gee, maybe they're had a better history than ours. You know, maybe, you know, they didn't make all the mistakes that we've made and stuff like that. Oh, no. That's not what they say. They say that they used to live in the constellation Lyra, but they got in a war with these reptilian people from the constellation Draco, the dragon, Draconians. They were forced to evacuate and flee as refugees, and then they took up. So they're not actually from the Pleiades. The Pleiades is the place they colonized. And by the way, the Pleiades is a bunch of bright blue-white stars, but there's a lot of other stars around them that are like Earth's, like the Earth's sun. You don't see those because they're not bright like the bright blue ones. So they apparently found a new home in this region of space with all these stars, of which we only see the blue seven sisters. There's hundreds of other stars around them that are dimmer. And they found a new home there, and they recovered and have become very powerful. And they are helping us. And but can you imagine being forced out of your home planet in spacecraft and having to go someplace else? And we all watched Battlestar Galactica, right? We saw what that looked like. You'd have to imagine that would be tremendous loss of life involved. Probably only 10% of the population, if they were lucky, could actually make it off the planets. The rest would just be destroyed, would be abandoned and destroyed. And if they were dealing with real lizard people, they were probably eaten. So that's their history. And they're probably trying to make sure that doesn't happen to us. I have joked, I said, well, being as they're human beings, they'll send us a bill later for this protection. But, you know, it's just like the United States and Britain. One of the first things that happened after Pearl Harbor was we sent a division of American infantry to Britain. And they arrived. They were still wearing doughboy helmets. They hadn't gotten the new helmets yet. And but the British were just so happy to see us arrive, because that meant that the United States, that there couldn't be any successful invasion of Britain by the Germans if a whole bunch of American troops were there, because they knew we could fight. If anybody knows the Americans can fight, it's the British. And after 2 wars between us, and then of course we were allies in World War I, and there was the American troops in the trenches, standing knee deep in mud with the Brits, and so the folklore. The reports are the reports, and you have to kind of figure out which reports to believe and which ones you don't. The best I can make out of it, my best estimate of the situation is, yes, these people who look just like us have arrived. They're helping to protect us, and they're helping us with new technologies, and some of them are intermarrying with us and having perfectly healthy children. And this is consistent with a lot of folklore. If you want to know what, by the way, the association with Lyra, which was their first home, their home world, can be seen in a movie by Walt Disney made in 1961, I believe, is called Moon Pilot. This American astronaut is supposed to go up and do a loop-de-loop around the moon, come back. And he's approached by this positively lovely woman. She has brown eyes and auburn hair. And her name is Lyra. And she's an ET in the movie. And she says the radiation protection on your capsule is not sufficient. You're going to have to use, she gives them a formula for better radiation protection, better shielding. And she says, here, take this to your people and tell them, insist that they put this on your spacecraft so you won't die. So she saves his life, and then they fall in love and they get married and have kids. This is a Walt Disney movie. It's kind of a comedy. I would say watch that movie. And it actually has a kind of comic version of the UFO cover-up in it too, because finally the government is looking for this woman. They want to talk to her. And but then if you go to Star Trek, one of the things along with the Prime Directive and Warp Drive in Star Trek was something they remarked upon several times during the series, was that they kept running into very human aliens. Of course, Spock is half human, half Vulcan. The Romulans were basically Vulcans who had gone rogue. Then there was, of course, the Klingons, everyone's favorite group of aliens. They were basically human beings, and especially in their behavior. And, they had very non-human alien types, but they had planets where everybody looked just like human beings. And they remarked on this, that how strange this was, and that this had no explanation. It was as if the human race was seeded across the stars somehow by some powerful agency and would emerge from the genetic material that was deposited here. We would emerge from the evolutionary chain and be genetically compatible. Now, can you imagine a technology that would seed genetic material onto a planet, knowing that millions of years later, something like us would emerge, and the genetic makeup would match places where they had seeded they'd used the same seed. That's a pretty amazing idea. It speaks of a technology that's far, far beyond anything that anybody has talked about. So there were two places where, The Day the Earth Stood Still, one of the first movies with an ET in it, 1951, just a few years after Roswell. There were two movies made about aliens that year that were released. One was The Day the Earth Stood Still, and who steps out of the saucer? Somebody who looks just like us. Or we look like them because they predate us. They were around before we were around. And the other movie that was released that year was The Thing from Another World, with James Arness playing the alien. He was humanoid, but he was not physiologically human at all. So we had one very friendly alien coming to try and show us, please don't blow yourselves up. And the other one was, of course, a blood-sucking monster. I'm sorry. He used human blood as a source of sustenance. And it depicts the first animal mutilations and the first human mutilations from an alien. Both of those are in that movie. And of course, we've seen plenty of animal mutilations, and reportedly they're human mutilations that match the same pattern, but those are kept very quiet. They don't want, those are classified. If that happens to you, your body is taken and cremated immediately so that nobody can figure out how you died. So these things all appear to match and be consistent. So I'm convinced that yes, it is true. As strange as it's very strange, but it apparently is true.
Now, where do the Greys and the reptilians fit into all this?
Well, they're on Earth. Let's say Earth is a fairly typical planet. I mean, we have liquid water here. We have oxygen. I mean, the stuff of life on Earth is when stars fuse hydrogen into helium, then if the stars are bigger, they start burning others. They start burning the helium, and what comes out when they burn the helium is carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. And those are the three building blocks of all the organic materials. And once you have hydrogen, which is part of water, and you have carbon, and you have nitrogen and oxygen, you have all of organic chemistry. And nature, like lava, is a mixture of silicate, silica compounds with iron and magnesium. And there's this complex molecule called chlorophyll. It's a bunch of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen and hydrogen all together. And the very center of it is an atom of magnesium. If you substitute for the magnesium iron, you get hemoglobin. So these kinds of things. So Earth and its biology are very typical. Now, so you ask about, the relationship between, okay, we got the Pleiadians, they look like us, which is a very practical way to look. I mean, the Greys look roughly like us. They walk on two legs, have hands with thumbs. I mean, these are all, but the Greys apparently come from a branch of biology that's invertebrate, and they don't use hemoglobin, reportedly. They use copper-based blood called hemocyanin. It's found on Earth. Octopi use hemocyanin, so do squid. They have very advanced nervous systems. Octopi are rated to be the same intelligence as house cats.
Is it also horseshoe crab?
Oh, yeah, the horseshoe crab uses blue blood. So does the tarantula, so does the scorpion. There are two types of creatures that crawled out of the oceans. So life started in the oceans, it became advanced in the oceans. Okay, there were two types of life. Basically, there were the bottom dwellers, where it's low oxygen because it's away from the surface of the ocean, and low oxygen and cold temperatures. That's where hemocyanin, this copper-based compound, the molecular structure is very different from hemoglobin, but it's called hemocyanin. It's blue when it has oxygen. And the reports are that Gray's blood when exposed to air, let's say they're dead, but their blood oozes out and it turns bright blue when it's exposed to air, and that's hemocyanin. Hemocyanin is bright blue when it's got oxygen and colorless when it doesn't have oxygen, unlike hemoglobin, which is bright red when it's full of oxygen and slightly duller red, sort of bluish, when it has low oxygen. And so the grays apparently come from an evolutionary line related basically to horseshoe crabs and invertebrates. Imagine what climbs out of the ocean on some other planet is like crabs or scorpions. There were sea scorpions, and then they crawled out on land, became land scorpions, the spiders. They all have hemocyanin. Hemocyanin is not optimal for living on land in a high oxygen environment because it doesn't carry oxygen as well as hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is based on iron, and iron has a much stronger affinity to oxygen. It carries oxygen much more efficiently at warm temperatures than copper. So you have this now in the oceans, the animals that used hemoglobin very early were fish because they swam near the surface where the water's warm and it's full of oxygen. So they eventually grew legs, the fish did, and climbed out on land, and that became the vertebrates, and later amphibians, and then dinosaurs, and finally humans. That's that evolutionary line based on swimmers in the ocean, finally adapting to creep out on land. And so we are red-blooded hemoglobin users. And that's much more optimal, by the way, for everything on Earth. I mean, you've got hemocyanin on Earth, and scorpions have it, but scorpions don't run things. We run things. We use, some cultures consider scorpions to be a delicacy. But crabs, like the coconut crab, uses hemocyanin. They're so well adapted to living on land.
Those things are actually scary.
Oh yeah, they can bite you. They can their claws are so powerful they can take your finger off. And but they're so well adapted to living on land that if you throw them in the ocean, they'll drown. Their bodies are so adapted to living on air, but they use hemocyanin, copper-based blood. But all of the dominant land animals with the advanced nervous systems are all red blood based because the brain uses a lot of oxygen. Oh, interestingly enough, by the way the octopus has a brain that and brains, the nerve impulses, that takes a lot of oxygen to run, by the way. The way the octopi brain is constructed, it has big blood sacs around it to act as oxygen reserves. And so you see pictures of grays, they seem to have big heads, and the heads have kind of lobes on them. Those are probably oxygen storage. They're not neurons. They're basically, under their skulls, they basically have oxygen reserves because their blood is blue. And so the grays apparently come from a line of social insect kind of, or also they're social spiders. I don't know of any insects that actually use hemocyanin, but we certainly have social insects on our society, and we have there's certain types of spiders that hunt in packs, and so they come from a different evolutionary line apparently, where instead of fish, amphibian, reptile, mammals, you had basically something like communal coconut crabs that ended up forming a society. And because it was very practical, became, two-legged. Instead of 6 legs, they just got 2. I don't know anything about autopsies on grays, but I'm sure you might actually find vestigial 6 legs on them, that aren't used anymore, just like whales have bones that represented, that they used to have 4 feet. So the Greys, apparently completely different evolutionary line. They use copper-based blood, which is not optimal, by the way. People say, oh, these are well-constructed androids. No, they aren't. If they were well-constructed androids, they'd use red blood like us, because oxygen, hemoglobin is optimal for this environment. So then we have basically human beings, which are apparently a super terrestrial phenomenon. We're not just on Earth. We're seeded across the stars. So we have the Greys, very kind of social insect kind of characters. And then you have us, who are mammals, born in litters, have families, we're social predators. There's no doubt about that. But we're not, we are raised in a very nurturing kind of environment, bonded with our mothers and our litter mates. If you're a social insect, you're probably hatched from a bunch of eggs in a hatchery. That's why they don't have navels, apparently. You instinctively do whatever the tribe, the hive tells you to do. But it's not like human society at all, where people make choices. So I think a lot of the social structure for the Greys is hardwired. I mean, they don't have any conscientious objectors at Zeta Reticuli. Everybody does what they're supposed to do. It's kind of like the Greys are the North Korea of the galaxy, basically. And so then you have the Pleiadian human. I now call human beings from Earth, I call them Terrans. Okay, then that's the traditional science fiction term for us, Terra, meaning Earth, and Terrans, and then you have Pleiadians, and the tall whites. Some of the tall whites are apparently very humanoid, and they're basically all platinum blondes, but their skin, they say, is as white as typing paper. They're very fragile and rather inflexible in their. People who report working with them say that any deviation from standard procedure can be fatal for the humans who are working with them. This one guy forgot his clipboard, according to one report. At Site 51, he was working with some tall whites. And apparently they get taller than, they average about 7 feet tall. That's not, but they're very skinny and fragile. And some people said, oh, the people who wanted to go to Las Vegas were tall whites. No, they're not. They don't sound like they mesh well with standard human society at all, or want to mesh with us. They're just a completely different culture. And but if it was Pleiadians, that would make perfect sense, because they're apparently very similar to us culturally, as well as and by the way, I will also tell you, supposedly the Pleiadians are our allies, and I'm very grateful for them if that's true. But and finally, it just comes down to, since I'm a Christian, I say, well, God is our big extraterrestrial ally. You want to talk to an extraterrestrial? Pray. He's always listening. And anybody who's the real friend of the human race will recognize that. I don't believe the Pleiadians are going to save us. God will save us. He may use the Pleiadians to do that, but now, so okay, I've discussed the Greys, who apparently are kind of hive insect, descended from hive insects. They're probably not true vertebrates. They probably have kind of an exoskeleton like insects. So they have musculature simply because it's a very practical form to have. The human form is very practical. Walk on two legs, hands with thumbs, face that's flat with big eyes, and you don't have a big nose in front of you so you can see what you're working on. That all makes perfect sense. It's just their physiology is completely different. It's very different from ours and based on copper, not iron-based blood, and their social structure, I think, is completely different than ours. Do I think they're pure evil? No, I do not. They're probably just following orders like people do. I consider them, though, the North Korea of the galaxy. I mean, and I'll get to this in a minute. Then there's these reports of these reptilian, the draconians. The dinosaurs were going great guns down here. There were dinosaurs for like 100 million years, and the dinosaurs evolved, and there was a group of dinosaurs that was starting to walk, like Tyrannosaurus Rex walked on two legs, and they were starting to get bigger and bigger brains. So you can easily imagine they were going to develop some intelligent life, but they're reptiles. They're not mammals. That means their social structure would be very different, and so the reptoids, there's hardly any believable reports of, I've only counted 3 where, and I believe the reports, but they were from the military during the Vietnam War, that they encountered them in the DMZ region of Vietnam, where there are a lot of caves, as it turns out, big cave systems. And so, and they have red blood. They're reptiles. But the human, by the way, the folklore for the human race in most cultures says snakes are evil, which makes sense because they're snakes. The inland taipan snake in Australia, if it bites you, you're dead unless you can get to a hospital get medical care within about 10 minutes. It's the most poisonous snake on earth. I mean, they are, reptiles, especially snakes, are considered very dangerous. The folklore of intelligent reptiles begins with the Bible, or the Garden of Eden story. Here you had a pair of people living in this beautiful place, and they got ejected because of this reptile. It doesn't say what physical form he had. He said he was cursed to become a snake afterwards. But apparently that may be a garbled version of the story of the Pleiadians having to flee the Draconians. And, kind of a Battlestar Galactica movie situation. And by the way, I like the first series of Battlestar Galactica. The second one, I think I tried watching a little bit, and I thought, well, I like the women, but you know, it's this is new age Hollywood. You know, they're running this franchise into the ground, just like Disney ran the Star Wars franchise into the ground.
Well, just like everything else. Yeah, just like
They squeeze the last bit of juice out of any good idea. And
John, there's a reason we're on YouTube, right? Like we are an alternative now.
we are. Isn't that nice?
Mm-hmm.
The media is no longer controlled by an elite.
Well,
You know, elite out of
mainstream
Silicon
media is.
Valley.
The
You know,
mainstream media is, but the rest of it's not.
oh well, mainstream media. If there's anything this election has done, is it's torpedoed mainstream media forever. They lost all credibility, in my opinion. I don't. If it's on the mainstream, the three networks, there was, well, I'd rather not talk politics. That's one reason we had the election, so we could get rid. But
Yeah, no, you don't have to. You don't have to.
Yeah,
I think
I'm a
it's fair
Trump
to say that
supporter,
the mainstream media
and I did the media, the mainstream, the legacy media was in the tank for the. It might as well be the Democrat Ministry of Information. No, what's that? Yeah. So anyway, I just yeah, it was just a propaganda arm of the DNC. So anyway, now, so we have on Earth 3 different types of physiologies that have high social, you know, kind of social predator kind of societies. One is insects, wasps, ants, even some social spiders that cooperate. They build one big web, you know, to catch things. Everybody eats. And then you have, of course, reptilians. Crocodiles and alligators have colonies together. They don't fight with each other. You know, they have a social structure. Apparently, it's and they basically apparently communicate with kind of gurgling sounds. People have figured out that they're actually kind of talking to each other, but you know, their brains are the size of walnuts, so they can't be saying that much interesting. I'm sure they have legacy media and new media. They don't have it. The alligators and crocodiles don't have an internet, though. See, that's so. Then you've got the human race, and so it's just natural to believe that on some planets out there, social insects ended up running things, and the fact that they had this inefficient blood system, nature just made up for that somehow. It was kind of baked in. They couldn't change their blood chemistry, but they just tried to improve on it. And I'm sure that when we finally see some autopsies on Gray's heads, you'll find out that the brain, is about this, roughly the size of a human brain, but that has big reserves, oxygen reserves around it to keep it running, like in case of emergencies, like if your flying saucer is crashing, you have to think fast. Or if you're on the ground and the people you were supposed to abduct pull out a shotgun and start shooting at you, then you have to think fast. And the accounts are that if you shoot at Greys on the ground, if they're trying to abduct you, they run. They don't have any magic force field that protects them or anything like that. So then there's the reptoids, and the reptoids are the enemies of by the way, the Pleiadians apparently do not like the reptoids. Basically, they keep them out of this region of space. The whole Western tradition of dragons is that they're the symbol of evil. St. George and the dragon, finally the dragon the dragons, angels. There's war in heaven, and the angels serving the dragon are destroyed and cast down to earth. You know, they're cast out of heaven. But what's interesting, if you go to the other side of the world, in the Chinese culture, the dragon is considered the highest celestial power. So it speaks to the fact that we've had past contact, apparently, with these reptilian people. And the reputation of dragons is they're smart and powerful and dangerous. And that fits that, you know, the Pleiadians were saying, well, we had a lot of trouble with these people in the past, and we fixed that. So the other problem, if there were reptilian aliens, the Greys seem to want this planet for themselves. We understand that. It's a nice planet, but they can't have it. And and that situation looks like it's in a nice stalemate. I think the Pleiadians are out there with the preventing the Greys from staging a real invasion. So that I told one group, I said, the very fact that we have a UFO cover-up that's lasted 80 years is actually a sign of success. I mean, we haven't had any War of the Worlds or Independence Days invasions or anything like that. I mean, if the aliens landed in force, I mean, the novelty of running into alien intelligences the novelty of this would wear off very quickly for human beings. It would be just another war, and humans are used to having wars. It's in our blood, and you know, we graduated from the school of Darwin just like they did. And the interesting thing is the reptilian aliens, the human reaction to a giant reptilian, if the human is armed, he'll just open fire immediately. He's not going to try and talk to. I mean, if you, I think I told you this. You know, if you're in the military and you're point on some patrol, some squad out in the woods, you run into a Gray. If he can get his hands up before you pull the trigger, you'll take him prisoner. You know, because he doesn't look that threatening. But if you run into an 8-foot tall kind of alligator man, you just open fire immediately. I mean, that's such an obvious threat to human life. I mean, that you don't hear of reptilians abducting people. If you did, they probably didn't survive it if they were abducted by, you know, these people are dinosaurs. They're very carnivorous, apparently. They like, they say we taste like pork. You know, we say they taste like chicken. And so it's, this reptilian mammal thing this is old bad blood. So they can't make, you know, the best way to take over a planet, according to Sun Tzu, if you read the galactic version of Sun Tzu, the best way to take over a planet is without any fighting. So the Greys, that's what the Greys have been trying to do. They've been trying to indoctrinate people that they abduct and terrorize, and here's something that I think is really neat, is that if you have copper-based blood and you're trying to hybridize that with a human being, so you get the human immune system transferred to this hybrid, the blood chemistries don't agree. And in my science fiction novel, I actually had these nurses at one point taking care of these hybrid children. They were Gray human hybrids. And they said, well, they don't live long, most of them, because they have copper-based blood for their brain and spinal cord, but red blood for the rest of the body. So they actually have two blood systems. And the nurse is explaining this to the chief heroine, Cassandra Chen, and Cassandra says, "Well, I'm not a biologist, but that doesn't sound like it would work very well." And the nurse says, "It doesn't. It's a terrible, terrible engineering. It's an a bioengineering nightmare," she says. And so they have very high mortality rates, and most of them are wimps when they grow. If they live long, they're wimps. And so the Gray attempt to force a colonization on this planet by treachery and stealth has failed. And one of the main reasons it's failed is that the blood pigments are so different. They can't hybridize with us. Now, the Pleiadians, on the other hand, can hybridize with us. In fact, it's not called hybridization. It's just called shore leave. They hybridize. They produce children with us just fine, and they're very healthy, apparently. So our genetic makeup is probably 1/3 Pleiadian. So that's one reason you can't tell them genetically from human beings, is because they look like just part of the spectrum of genetic types you find on Earth. Even our blood types are similar. You know, you don't run into a new weird blood type when you take when a Pleiadian, so let's say he's in the military, he's managed to insert himself into the military, and the military sergeant says, "Okay, guys, line up. It's time to give blood." And you know, unless he claims he's a Jehovah's Witness or something, you know, he can't. You know, they'd spot if his blood type was different, they'd spot that immediately. But no, they don't. It's that there's nothing that sticks out, apparently. So you have the Pleiadians who look on us as blood relatives, and they're taking care of us. They are helping us. That's the story I hear. They are basically our allies, and because they are giving us technologies, we're eventually going to become. By the way, in the Star Trek mythos, the extraterrestrials who reached out to the human race and taught them everything to how to become a major interstellar power was the Vulcans. They came to Earth and helped the human race recover from a nuclear war, and we'd already invented warp drive, but they helped us, and so then we ended up they sponsored us into the Federation. So something like that is similar is happening to us, but the reptoids, you know, the Sun Tzu trying to take this place without any fighting, that just, there's no chance of that, just because human beings regard any large reptile as just incredibly threatening. And there's probably, well, I mean, we have big reptiles and they're very dangerous, crocodiles and alligators. You know, there are places in Florida you just can't swim. The alligators will get you. And then down in the very southern part of Florida, there's the crocodiles. And the crocodiles and alligators, by the way, are genetically quite different, even though they look the same. But they are very hostile to each other. Crocodiles and alligators will fight whenever they come into contact. And so, and you know, everywhere else, alligators are only really found in the United States. If you go around most of the world, it's the crocodile, and they're dangerous every place. They are absolutely deadly. And so, just like you don't swim in water with great white sharks. You can swim with You can swim with killer whales, and they'll leave you alone because they're afraid of us. They're smart. They're smart enough to know to mess with us.
Unless you've hunted
Got a
and killed
plastic.
killer whales.
What?
Unless you've hunted and killed. Unless you've hunted and killed a killer whale.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that
I know of a story where there were 3 people in Alaska, and they were in a canoe, and they were canoeing by a killer whale. One of the people on the boat had hunted and killed an orca at some point. And these things are smart. There was a killer whale in the area that knew. So it capsized the boat and grabbed that specific individual. And dove until as deep as it could.
Yeah.
It left the other 3 alone, the other 2 alone.
Well, I believe that I believe this report, because killer whales, they don't want any truck with the human race as a rule, but they have a lively interest in revenge. And yeah, it makes sense that they would pick out the guy who did it. So yeah, don't mess with killer whales, and they won't mess. The message they send is, don't mess with us, and we won't mess with you. And that's a perfectly good basis for getting along.
And but if you do, you're going to die ugly.
You're going to die ugly. Yeah. And they probably dove deep with him because they wanted him to experience a lot of terror just before he died. If they bit his head off, it'd be quick. No, this is better. Dive deep, and he actually has about a minute of conscious thought about, gee, I shouldn't have killed that killer whale the other 2 weeks ago. If I had to do it over, I would do things differently. So the reptoids have this terrible disadvantage. They can't do what the Greys have been doing. Try to do this stealth treachery thing, because the human race just has such an antipathy to large reptiles, which is, embedded in our genes. And so it's, small reptiles, snakes, we kill those, and big, I had some alligator's tail stew when I was in Florida. It was very good. It's kind of like, reminded me of dark meat turkey. It was very rich, but it was very tight, very good, very satisfying. And so we have, on Earth, we have these 3 kind of social predator types, and that's where intelligence evolves most quickly in the evolutionary record among social predators. And that's, the 2 smartest creatures on Earth apparently are the killer whale and humans. And they're insects that are social insects, and they make war together, like termites and ants don't like each other, and there's wasps. They form hives. So you could imagine that on some planet that would end up evolving into an intelligent culture. So then if you look at these, if you take on the whole these reports we get of ET contact, they seem to fit into 3 different groups, kind of an insectoid hive type bunch, reptiles, and but they don't report those very often, and then people who look just like us. So, and we are a very successful evolutionary creature. So, so in a sense, the folklore, both from antiquity and even Hollywood, informed by the intelligence agencies, the Pleiadians are basically, based on reports, are here. They're friendly to us. They look human, so we can't trust them completely. But one of the other things that happened is our technologies has advanced so strongly in the last 80 years. We're now a moving target, especially if something like, let's say the Greys have this ambition that they could take the Earth. We've got all these nuclear weapons. It says in the movie Dune, or the book Dune, says he who can destroy a thing can control a thing. Nobody can take this planet now. In fact, according to Philip Corso, the reason the Soviet Union and the United States built 10 times more nuclear weapons than they actually needed to destroy each other was the Greys. They were both the Russians and the United States had a understanding that if the Greys invaded, the war would go nuclear, and if they looked like they were going to take the planet, everybody would end up taking a radioactive wasteland that would be useless to them, and we would take as many to them with them as possible. So that was a very strong deterrent to any invasion. And so the mainstream science, believe it or not, based on the exoplanets we've seen and the fact that nuclear energy is what runs the universe. You can imagine making a bomb that would make a planet into a black hole, but that's completely unnecessary. Which all you need is just a big hydrogen bomb. The Russians basically proved, by the way, you could build a hydrogen bomb as big as the Empire State Building, and it could destroy the Earth. And they had that they had an idea of nuclear weapons destroying the Earth completely in Dr. Strangelove. And apparently the Russians actually had figured out a way to do that. And Nikita Khrushchev vetoed it. He says, well, it's crazy, he says. Says, no. And they were going to have shiploads full of thorium and stuff like that, and that they could be set off with a big hydrogen bomb. They set off the biggest hydrogen bomb in history. It was 50 megatons. It easily could have doubled the yield on it. We've now seen the plans. Apparently, the Russians shared the plans for this hydrogen bomb, and it was just very straightforward. So ironically, the fact that we have a UFO cover-up that's lasted 80 years, that the government can sustain because, there's been no big invasion or War of the Worlds, Martian tripods walking around burning up people. And by the way, the original War of the Worlds, the aliens not only had heat rays and poison gas, but they also sucked the blood of human beings as their sustenance. That was a book written in 1897, turn of the century. And it depicted London being leveled just like Dresden was in World War II. So the only place you find that kind of destruction in science fiction, in any kind of literature before World War II, is in War of the Worlds. But anyway, the very fact that you can sustain a UFO cover-up at this point means, in some sense, we're living in some kind of military stalemate, just like the Cold War. And I know, look, it's very annoying. Why, but at the same time, there are people I know. They're my friends. Some of them are in my family. And if you start talking about what was testified before Congress about the UAP, just like the government to try and rename something, I joke with her. Yeah. But anyway, if you start talking to them about this, their eyes just glaze over. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear about it. It is basically too frightening to them. The idea that the human race is not the ultimate top of the food chain in the universe. Somebody mentioned AI. Yeah. There are two branches of non-human intelligences who will want human race to be extinct in the end. One is the Greys, maybe the reptoids, non-human intelligence. The other is this AI that you guys are cooking up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. As a scientist and a science fiction writer, I know a scam when it's coming down the street, and it's like a bunch of mice genetically engineering a cat. Life's too boring around here. Let's make something that eats us. So the guys who are leading the AI charge to try and make an AI conscious computer that's smarter than a human being, I will make the prediction that they will curse their own mothers for having born them before this drama is over. And I know how this is going to end. I wrote a science fiction novel. My last science fiction novel I wrote recently was The War of the Singularity. The singularity is, of course, when the AI achieves super intelligence, and AI will never have sentience. I'm sorry. Sentience it's a very efficient way to organize a brain. That's all. If my cat has sentience, I actually don't own a cat anymore, but I've owned several of them. My daughter, both my daughters have cats and love them. If crows have sentience, they'll admire themselves in the mirror and preen their feathers. Then we can eventually build and let me tell you something about sentience. Sentience is ultimately predatory. You don't need to have a strong feeling of I think, therefore I am, if you're just going to chew your cud all day. No, but if you're going to go hunt and kill other animals, then not only that, there's a great genetic advantage to having consciousness. If you're looking out for number one, if you have a sense of being number one, you're conscious, then you look out for number one. If you have a sense of self, then you have a sense of self-preservation, and you will pass on your genes to the next generation. So these people trying to build these AI things, this is, to me, this is absolute folly. What we need is human intelligence. Human intelligence. And so there, that's all I'm going to. I wrote a novel called The War of the Singularity, where a superconducting cybernetic consciousness, cybercon they call it, gives it its best shot. It ends up taking over the Earth and the Moon, but the Mars colony and the asteroid belt and the space fleet are still out there. And so it doesn't, it has to fight a war with the best, except everything in the AI's plan goes according to plan, except that he ends up in a war with the planet Mars. And so anyway, so non-human intelligence is ultimately predatory, my friends. Don't kid yourselves. When you look in the mirror, you're looking at the result of a long line of predators. And anything you make, especially if you design it, it's going to be a predator too. And we're going to have an ultimate Darwinian little struggle with the AI. Yes, you can read my novel, The War of the Singularity, and see how that turns out.
Now, John.
Yes.
Have you seen the recent hearings, the UAP hearings, like last week?
I tended to skip them. I read some excerpts. Ironically enough, if there's, let us say that the human race is a bunch of lucky sons of guns. Pleiadians arrived. They've checkmated the Greys in space. We have all these nuclear weapons, and we understand the Greys pretty well. We've reversed engineered a lot of their stuff, and so they're never going to take this place. So that's so. Ironically enough, that means the UFO cover-up can continue. I know, it's terrible. Success means even greater annoyance because the government now is under no pressure to spill the beans on this thing because they've got the situation kind of stabilized. Now,
the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Absolutely. I arrived at this conclusion only in the last month or so after analyzing the whole kind of situation. There's 3 groups out there. One of them can't come anywhere close to here because we'll shoot at them. We'll shoot on sight if we see them. The other one is they got the wrong blood chemistry to take over this planet. And then there's people who view us as blood cousins, and they're helping us. So the human race has managed to get through this difficult period. We've survived the hazing. I wrote a book called Cosmic Awakening, and basically I presented the same sort of analysis I've given here. The place on Earth that really inspired me as to what the human future is going to look like, what I believe the human future will look like Star Trek. We're going to be accepted into a fellowship of, a community of probably very humanoid ETs, a galactic federation. If some of them may not be, some, there are apparently some Greys who are nice. Go figure. Nothing, the risk of separating some problem into 3 parts, insects, mammals, and reptiles, is that, the Earth is very complex. Why should we expect the rest of the universe to be simple? It isn't simple. And apparently there's 50 different groups. The reports are there's 50 different cultures coming here to look at us. Many of them just motivated by pure curiosity. They're studying us. They don't want this planet. They don't want any trouble. We're just interesting. It kind of makes you wonder, why are we so fascinating if there are a lot of other planets like ourselves? Well, there aren't, apparently. We're at any given time in the galaxy, in this neighborhood, there are probably only 1 or 2 planets like us where a culture is actually making the transition from being planet-centered to being cosmic-centered. And so I think, so I haven't followed the UAP hearings. I did catch the work of Lou Elizondo, whom I've met. He reminded me of a lot of people from the intelligence agencies and special forces that I've worked with over the years. I respect him. I think he's saying what he's authorized to say. He's basically told us that. That he had to sign agreements where he could say certain things and not say other things. But he's saying that non-human intelligences are scoping. They're casing the joint. They're looking at all our military technology. Do you think they're examining all the literature on Earth, the great works of Shakespeare and stuff like that? No, they don't. They're not interested in that stuff. They're interested.
They should be if they were smart.
Oh, they should be. They should be. They should be studying Shakespeare. They would learn something from Shakespeare.
Well, not learn something from Shakespeare, but learn something about us.
They would learn something about us, and here's the so I wrote this book, Cosmic Awakening, that instead of just being a book about the UFO phenomenon, it tried to take a wide view of, okay, the human race started out as a bunch of primitive people on this planet, and then we got contact with, like Pleiadians, and by the way, anyone who has blue blood is considered royalty of some sort. That's apparently the Greys got here, and we figured out their blood was blue. I wonder how that happened. So maybe they had some accidents here. Who knows? But anyway, we like their ships, and then so this, we're kind of going through. Yeah, I use the analogy that it's like you graduated from high school. Okay, your senior year, piece of cake. It was a cakewalk. You finally got everything figured out. You're an object of awe and admiration by your underclassmen, sophomores, freshmen, and juniors. You're a senior. Okay, now you go off to college. Guess what? You're a freshman again. You got to learn everything. You got to live in the dorm. You got to learn a lot of stuff you didn't learn in high school. You got professors who tell you all sorts of stuff about history that you never heard in high school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now there's a society on Earth that actually managed this thing. That was Japan. Japan was a hermit kingdom. In fact, they became hermits because the Spanish tried to conquer them. It's interesting. The Spanish conquistadors arrived at Japan and hoped to take it. They just conquered the Philippines to the south. That's why the Philippines were Spanish. And so they went up north to try and conquer Japan, and the Japanese were just too tough. And not only that, the Japanese had acquired gunpowder from the Portuguese, the evil Portuguese. And I actually found a letter. It's from the Spanish governor of the Philippines writing back to the King of Spain saying, these wretched Portuguese, may they roast in hell, have sold the Japanese, gunpowder and muskets, and now they've learned how to make all that stuff themselves, and they know how to use them. And this means we can't. This, they said, dealing with the Japanese is the most difficult part of this place. He says in the Pacific, is the Japanese are difficult to deal with, very ferocious. And so anyway, so he writes this letter to the King of Spain. So the Spanish, when they couldn't land the conquistadors and conquer like they did Mexico or the Philippines, they instead sent missionaries to try and convert everybody to become good Catholics. So they would accept the Spanish rule. They accept the rule of the Pope and the Pope's special emissaries, which was the conquistadors. That didn't work either. The Shogun figured out what they were doing and made Christianity. he basically said, all you Christians, you're going to go back to being traditional Shintoists or Buddhists. He says, are there any questions? Somebody raised their hands, so he was immediately taken out and killed in a very gruesome manner. And then the Shogun said to the crowd of Japanese peasants, he says, are there any other questions? So the Japanese basically sealed themselves off because of the Western barbarians for like 300 years. And then the Americans' fleet arrived because we were having a lot of trade across the Pacific, and American sailors were getting, shipwrecked on Japan, and we couldn't get them back. So this finally became enough of an annoyance in Washington that they sent a fleet of steamships with cannons on them to sail right into Tokyo Bay under Commodore Perry, and it was very friendly. The Japanese were duly impressed. They practiced firing their cannons at just the water out in Tokyo Bay, and the Japanese realized that we had better cannons than they had, and so the Commodore Perry came ashore with a battalion of Marines, and they had negotiations, and they negotiated a trade agreement. And the Japanese quickly learned, oh my gosh, the rest of the world has all of this learning. And the Japanese had a very highly educated elite, so they sent their best and brightest people to Harvard and Oxford, Cambridge, to learn the ways of the Westerners. They also imported a whole bunch of Western experts on steam engines, cannons, military stuff. And within about 30 years, Japan became a very modern society by the standards of the time. They became like a European power. They had steam railroads, they had factories, they had steel mills, and they adjusted to the fact that the Western world wasn't just a bunch of barbarians, that they had real learning. And, the Japanese were fascinated by physics and astronomy. They'd never heard about any of this stuff. So they, and several Japanese ended up winning the Nobel Prize for physics. And we know about World War II. They put up a ferocious fight. And they certainly made mistakes. But Japan offers us an example on Earth of a society with a highly educated elite that made the decision to learn about the larger world. So there are people listening to this program whose sons and daughters will go to other stars and study at universities there and learn the learning of the Pleiadians and people like them. I believe that. And those would be very brave people. Just imagine what the Japanese must have felt leaving Japan to go to England, halfway around the world, or the United States. But they did it. They did just fine. So I talk about that in the book Cosmic Awakening, and I say this provides us with an example of how to be human. Smart humans are adaptable. So we must embrace the cosmos, not be afraid of it. And we're going to do okay. I think the human race is a bunch of lucky sons of guns, to tell you the truth. By just a number of happy coincidences, we managed to avoid getting colonized by advanced extraterrestrials, and now we have blood kin basically helping us. We're going to do fine. We're going to do fine. The future will look like Star Trek. There. That's what I believe is going to happen. And I wrote this in this book called Cosmic Awakening. It's available on Amazon.com. And it's you could just say God was looking out for us. You know, ultimately, you have to believe in that this stuff did not happen by chance. It was all according to some divine plan. And if you read the Bible in Greek, by the way, when Jesus tells his disciples, you know, one of his last speeches to them before he ascends into the heavens, he says, go out into all the cosmos and preach the gospel to every creature. And when John the Baptist saw Jesus for the first time, he said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the cosmos. The Christianity is a cosmic religion. The word cosmos is the Greek word that we translate into world in English. When they say, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that word is the Greek word cosmos. The New Testament is written in Greek, and that's the word that is used, that is translated as world, cosmos. And it means exactly in the Old Testament, in the Bible, to the ancient Greeks who composed this idea. The person who invented the term, by the way, was Pythagoras, as in the Pythagorean theorem, one of the first great Greek philosophers. He invented the idea of the cosmos was the entire ordered universe, everything, stars, the planets, the earth, everything, seen and unseen. And they spelled it with a K, cosmos, but that is what is in the Greek scriptures that are the original language that the scriptures are and the letters of Paul and everybody are written in. So Christianity is actually a cosmic religion. So don't worry that all of your cherished biblical beliefs are going to be shredded. You'll find out new things, like the Garden of Eden story may have been inspired partly by the Pleiadians being kicked out of the constellation Lyra. By the way, I mentioned this woman named Lyra in Moon Pilot, but if you notice, Spock played a musical instrument, was the lyre, a harp. Lyre just is an old word for harp. So we're going to do fine. We'll be just fine. God is watching out for us. I really believe that. I really, truly believe that. And he has watched out for us.
Any final for the audience?
Yeah. Don't get a self-driving car. Stay in the driver's seat yourself. when you go in the voting booth next time, don't ask Surrey how to vote.
Was that a thing? Come on.
I know there were people who did it. Surrey, who do I vote for? I can't make up my mind. You know, I mean, sure. I mean, and the non-human intelligences are in Darwinian competition with us, including the ones we are building ourselves. And it won't be the first time the human race has built something that is capable of annihilating us. Like we built nuclear weapons. Turns out that was useful. This AI business, I think this is, like I said, when all is said and done about that, people will curse the day they ever tried to make something smarter than the human race. There's something else, though. There's something else, though. No matter how smart your AI is, God is smarter than your AI. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to you. It may think he's smarter than God, but God is smarter.
When do you think
anyway, that's I think we should all realize we are very fortunate. And believe it or not, we are very fortunate that the UFO cover-up has been so successful for so long, because the universe has cooperated with the government to keep it quiet by not doing anything dramatic. So there. Anyway, guys and girls, stay frosty.
Thank you, my friend.
Frosty.
Stay frosty.
And stay grateful, especially Thanksgiving Day. Realize you and your family may be far luckier than you ever imagined.
Indeed. All right, my friend. As always.
Okay, thank you so much, Sean. A pleasure and honor always to be on your show. I hope. Is there any one last question anybody has? There.
Give it about a minute.
Sure.
Because I think there's a delay. Well, somebody's bowing to you. So.
Oh, well, that's. Well, hey, I am just doing my job. I'm just doing my job. 2 years ago, I'll tell you something. 3 years ago, I got COVID. I fainted in the doctor's office. You know, I knew I was COVID positive. It was the early vicious version. I ended up in a coma for 2 months in a hospital in Dallas, Texas. People were about to give up on me. They thought I was just going to die. And instead, they put a heart pump in me to try and keep me alive. They thought I'd be brain damaged. And they have told me that they consider that my recovery is miraculous. So I had a near brush with death. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I've always been a Christian. I'm not afraid of death. Well, I'm not running out and jumping in front of any cars, trucks on the freeway either. But let's just say I feel like I'm a lucky son of a gun. And I had the feeling that I was supposed to finish. There was business I was supposed to finish on Earth. I joke that in my hospital gown, when I woke up from this coma that lasted 2 months, I was so bad that my nose had turned blue because my heart was failing. And they just said, we can't do anything to save him. So, but God saved me. And I had a good friend of mine who saw me in a dream going down the corridor of the hospital towards the light, and then coming back. I'd been turned away. I mean, I have no memory of that, but this person who's a very good friend of mine, she's my former sister-in-law. I mean, I'm divorced from her sister, but we've remained good friends. The families have remained good friends. And so I joked to people that I went up to the pearly gates, and there was St. Peter, and he handed me a note. He says, I've talked to the big guy about your case. He says, don't be lazy. Go back and finish your work. So I was sent back to Earth. So I'm trying to do my job down here.
All right. So the question that came through is, hold on.
Long life and prosper. Live long and prosper. Ah, yes.
Is there a custodian file for the UAP?
I don't understand that question.
Is there
is there a big file someplace that explains all of this?
Yeah.
Yes, it's in my novel, Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. There. I was given permission to write that by the people from the agencies. At the farewell luncheon they gave me when I went down to Kennedy Space Center. I was working in Washington, D.C., and then I got a job in Kennedy Space Center. And when I left at farewell, I said, I've always wanted to write a science fiction novel. I'd like to write one, about the UFO cover-up collapsing. Yeah. And so I said, do you have any problem with me, putting in some stuff I heard around the coffee machine, the water cooler? And they told me, no, John, we always liked your reports. You're a good writer. We'll read your novel and just make sure, and they said this twice, they said, just make sure it's labeled science fiction. So I wrote the Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. And so anyway, two women saved the planet Earth. Anyway, but UAPs, I'll just say one last thing. They're still UFOs as far as I'm concerned. The term UAP was concocted over a bottle of rum at the Pentagon one night after hours. And what it is, it was an attempt by some jokers at the Pentagon to convert all ufologists into U-apologists.
Is that a joke, or is that for real?
That's a joke. Well, no, you spell it out. It's,
yeah, U-apologists.
Instead of ufologists, it's now U-apologists. I told that to another friend of mine who's the father of ufologists. His remarks are not something I can mention on air,
All right, my friend.
Okay, anyway.
Always
live long and prosper, you guys. Say your prayers tonight and be sure and celebrate Thanksgiving earnestly. You're a bunch of lucky sons of guns and daughters of guns. There. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.